G'day, Mike from Aussie Mike's Bees. Welcome to the final episode in the Long Lang build. Well, it's certainly been a journey, hasn't it? From working out the dimensions according to your materials, to selecting the materials and putting it all together and putting hardware together, how to finish it. And now in this final episode, the finishing touches. As I've said previously, you've got a whole bunch of options with legs. I've chosen to do steel. So I welded up these out of a bit of tube steel and angle and flat and gave it a coat of paint. I'll show you where it goes. Take a look down here and I've got them bolted in with coach bolts. Coach bolt, a washer and a nut. The nut and the washer on the inside there. And what else have we got? The glass jar to catch the small hive beetles. And we can access it from outside the hive. I'll bolt these ones on when we get outside. But for now, let's open her up and have a look inside. And you can see a few things here already. I've got cover strips, so you can lift those. We can get in and just inspect a few frames at a time. And if you're doing your inspection, you know how it is. You remove one frame so you can then easily manipulate the other frames. So we can lift it out and hang it up here on a couple of brackets that I put up there out of the way. You don't have to put it down on the ground. You can have different widths, of course. When I've trimmed this down, it's come to 125 millimeters or so. That's 5 inches in the old measurement. But you can have them varying widths as well, so you can swap and chop and change things as you choose. I'm settled with this for most of them. You don't have to finish the cover strips. It's out of the weather. And hardwood's not going to weather anyway, but even if you use pine, you could just put it straight in. The bees will tend to propolise underneath, or maybe line it with wax. You could wax dip them, but it's not really necessary. The next thing in store is the follower board. Now, what's the purpose of the follower board? Well, you're not going to completely occupy the whole box in one hit. Unless you rescue an enormous established colony, most of the time you're going to start just like normal beekeeping with a nuke or one brood box or two brood boxes if you're into doubles. And what you do is close off the spare space with the follower board. And that's what this device is for. Why have I got it sticking up with a great big handle? So it's easy to find. I've made this out of some 10mm ply and I've put a bit of a frame around the outside out of some old hardwood I found, more floorboard material, and I just cut it to the shape of the ledges. So it goes snug against the walls as each side goes into the ledges, all the way to the floor and along to the other side, up the other side. The bees just cannot get through that gap. Between the shape of the plywood cutout and the frame, it seals up pretty good against the walls and the floor. So not much is going to go through there. What's next? Well, we have a queen excluder. Some people don't use them, some people do. Once you've got a couple of honey frames, that is frames full of only honey, that becomes a queen barrier in itself. So you might choose to use one just to limit the queen to the brood area that you've selected. And once they've built a couple of frames out of honey after that, you could remove it, put it away. Alternatively, don't use one at all. Just let the queen lay as far as she lays. Eventually they'll start filling up with honey. And when they do, that's as far as she goes. So they'll naturally select the size of the brood chamber for themselves. And it's pretty easy to check to see you're only harvesting honey frames. So how did I go about making my queen excluder? Well, this will give you a clue. I just got the old angle grinder and cut the section that I needed out of an existing queen excluder. Now what I've done is out of some leftover floorboards again. This is hardwood. This is actually out of my old house, so this is 90 years old. So it was pretty hard. So I cut out pieces to make up the frame. It's a bit like a normal frame, except the dimensions are a little bit different. It has to go all the way to the floor, all the way to the sides to stop any, well, not any bees going around the sides, but particularly the queen. So this does go snug with the sides and the bottom. I've shaped the bottom with this angle so that bees can climb up from the floor and climb through. I don't know how it actually works, whether bees will go off the frame next to it and climb through up high, or whether the bulk of them will go through on the bottom. Now, as you may or may not know, the foragers come through from the entrance and then exchange their honey from their honey sacs to bees in-house that then distribute it to where it's going to be stored for us in the honey supers, but also the cells in the brood frames. So given that, my thoughts are those house bees are going to be running along the bottom of the hive on the floor underneath all of the frames that are in the brood section, then come to this, climb up, go through, then run along until they reach the frame that they want to climb and store the nectar. So how did I fit that wire mesh, the actual excluder, into the frame I built? Well, it was a bit of drilling. You see the bars down here that are maintaining the space between the wires. I drilled in the bottom and the top slots so that they would fit into there. And then in the side bars, you can see individual wires going into individual holes in the side bars. So that meant getting on the drill press and doing a lot of drilling, all at the correct spacing. It took a while, but it was worth it. So all up, that probably took me about 3 hours to make. But when I go into production, I'll have systems where I just make it all as on a mass-produced scale. Now, of course, one of the cover strips needs to have a hole in it for a feeder. I like these sorts of feeders. Holds a couple of litres, bees don't drown, easy to clean, access without bees being disrupted. That's my favourite. And this neatly fits into the hole and creates a lovely seal. And on the inside, no gap, so bees can't climb up the wrong way. Here we have it closed up as if we've got a colony in here. Now you notice this little drop here, that's the queen excluder, and we've got the follower board over here, so I always know where the queen excluder is. So what about this space on the other side of the follower? Well, that's free space until you fill it up with frames, so you could keep equipment there, more empty frames or foundation, because it is protected from the weather. Once you've built up your colony and you've kept moving the follower board along and filling it up with honey frames, eventually you'll have to harvest. And with normal boxes, you just empty out the bees from the box using an escape board or blowing them off or shaking them off and taking the whole super back to the honey room. Can't really do that this time because this thing's pretty heavy. All you do is just shake off each frame, put it into a plastic tote with a lid that keeps the bees out, take it all off to the honey room, harvest the honey, then return the stickies back and they'll clean up. Now for biosecurity, you don't want to be mixing up frames from one colony and putting them into another colony. So if you have more than one, make sure you're keeping the frames from all of this box separate from the other boxes. That's a good way of minimising the risk of AFB, EFB and any other pests and diseases that spread between colonies, particularly in honey. That's it for the workshop side. There's just one last thing that I thought of during the build. I made the roof out of ply and it's wax dipped, and that'll handle weather pretty good. The water will bead up. But what it doesn't stand up to so well is Australian sun. It's pretty harsh, and I've found on some of the lids that I've made on my normal boxes, wax dipped again, so I've had a few years to see what happens, and it weathers pretty badly. Even some of it began to delaminate. It doesn't hold up to our harsh weather, our harsh sun that well, and it's probably the same in places like Florida. What I've decided to do is put a metal roof on, much like hives. So I got a local sheet metal shop to cut out just the right size. I've got a pan brake, so I bent it to the size. But if you wanted to do this on your own build, you could just go to the local sheet metal shop with the measurements, and they'll cut it and bend it just the way you want. And that will cover that perfectly. And you just screw it down into place. Miniature roof screws into that has the rubber seal, just like metal roofs on houses, and that'll hold that in place and it'll give it a much longer lasting roof. So that's pretty much it for the build. Now it's time to get out into the bee yard and transfer a colony from its existing standard Langstroth box into this and get it started. So let's go.